Josef Jakobsh was born on July 26, 1930, and was called home to be with his Lord and Saviour on November 27, 2015, at the age of 85 years. He served several congregations in the German Church of God across Canada for nearly 40 years and was dearly loved. Joseph will be lovingly remembered and cherished by his wife Sonja, to whom he was married for 60 years. Their children Ralph, Ute Jakobsh of Calgary, Doris, Paul Roorda, Jakobsh of Waterloo, Ontario, and Randall, Lilli Wuenscher Jakobsh of Leipzig, Germany. 4 grandchildren, Jessen, Kaira, Leyla, and Joshua Jakobsh. 1 sister, Joanne Ruban of Winnipeg, several nieces and nephews, extended family members, and a host of friends. He was preceded in death by his parents John and Helen Jakobsh, 1 brother and sister-in-law, Frank and Irmgard Jakobsh, and 1 brother-in-law, Walter Ruban. Joseph knew his time on earth was coming to a close, and he was eager, even excited, to finally see and understand what he had believed in with all his heart during his time on earth. He wanted to see Jesus, his truest friend. But his final words were to his beloved wife Sonja, "I love you, I love you." Wow, look at all of you. So many friends. Dad would be so happy and honored that you made it. I'm sure he would have loved to say hi to each and every one of you. Not too bad for a boy of humble origins from Sarnovka, Ukraine. The wonder of Google Maps. This summer I showed Dad on Google Maps where Sarnovka was, a small Ukrainian village in the middle of nowhere. As we zoomed in, he said, "Yes, that last house on the left, that's our house." Now here we are, thousands of kilometers away in Vernon, BC, 85 years later, to honor and celebrate Josef Jakobsh. Why are so many of us here to pay our respects? Well, I think it's because my father was pretty special. When I try to describe people that didn't know Dad, I say, have you ever met a guy that's always happy, always positive? Someone where you can feel the genuine love he has for every person, where every person he meets feels better for having met him. That's my dad. Forget Mother Teresa. My dad is the closest thing you'll ever come to meeting a saint. A few years ago, I was at a coffee shop in Vernon, somehow got to talking to a stranger. I told him I was here visiting my folks, and after a while, he says, "Wait a minute, you mean the guy that walks around town, always smiling and whistling, always happy, taking time to say hi and talk to everyone he meets, cheering everyone up, that's your dad?" That was pretty typical of Dad. Big heart, big smile, time for everyone. He wasn't such a big fan of the long face, those who know him. Once back east, I think it was in Flint, Michigan, a ladies group sang the song, "I've got joy, 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 joy in my heart." And we all know the song. I think it was my father who said afterwards, "Thank you, ladies, that was great, but I have an idea that you can sing that song even better if you stop crying." You can take it from me, or from anyone who really knew him, that he wasn't any different at home. He was just as joyous at home as he was in church. His relationship with God was a joyous one. This August, Dad had fallen repeatedly. He couldn't get up and spend the night on the floor. I picked him off the floor 2 mornings in a row. When he finally agreed to be taken to the hospital, his concern wasn't for himself. "Son, go into my apartment, get me my Bible and some tracts. That guy in the next bed, I want to talk to him about Jesus." "Come on, Dad, you're here so the doctors can fix you up." "That's not important, son. Go get me my Bible." With Dad, because his love for others was so genuine, so pure, people bought into it. With him, it was obvious that he was one who walked the talk. He was just a humble painter. In fact, he was happiest in painting. He painted many a house in his various congregations. He never tried to come across as someone special. In that regard, he was just an average Joe. In fact, he felt the most comfortable with the common folk. The poorer, the better. He didn't have so much time for today's outward signs of success. intellect, power, politics, wealth. Part of that was circumstance. As a teenage boy, he was captured by the Russians and thrown into an internment camp where he was brutally beaten and starved for almost 5 years. When he miraculously survived and exited that prison, having spent his teenage years, there wasn't any time left to go to school. But how, after surviving an experience that should have turned him angry, cynical, bitter, afraid, did he turn out to be so loving, generous, compassionate? But they say that Dad meddled a bit. Back in the day when he was in Vernon from 68 to 72, his road to Damascus transformation proved to be Aylmer. Back in the early 70s, in the church, outward appearances were extremely important. Wearing a schlitz, a tie was extremely important. But here he is supposed to be inviting Old Colony Mennonites to church. And these Old Colony Mennonites believed that wearing a tie was sinful. So what did Dad do? He took off his tie. My elder siblings basically raised me, babysat me. Yeah, we'll call that pretty dumb. Because my parents would be out every evening visiting people, trying to bring them to church. But look how 10 years of going from door to door in Aylmer, inviting people to church turned out. Dad built that Aylmer church. Dad planted that tree. Is there another tree that has grown so tall, so fair, so strong? The Church of God Mission Board knew what they were doing when they sent this common painter, uneducated, the one that got along with the best of the poor, to Aylmer. After Aylmer, we moved to Calgary. It was quite a shock, from a growing church busting at the seams to Calgary. I had literally hundreds of friends in Aylmer Church. In Calgary, there wasn't one boy my age. Dad figured he had to do something. This was, of course, the biggest shock for him. Early on in Calgary, a stranger made the mistake of wandering into church. The ushers in the congregation didn't know what to do. Wow, an honest-to-goodness stranger. They stared at the stranger in panic. They didn't know what to do. The stranger left and never returned. My dad said, "People, what are you doing? How can the church grow if when a stranger comes in, you just stare at him, panic until he leaves?" Well, pretty soon he had that congregation and ushers trained. Boy, if the poor stranger happened to wander again, he was stampeded upon from all sides. So welcome, so made to feel at home. But still the church remained empty. That stream of displaced German refugees from Eastern Europe that had fed the church since after the war had been reduced to a trickle. The church was empty. The youth taught to invite people asked, how can we invite people to church if they don't understand a word of German? So Dad, as one of the oldest ministers, born in the Ukraine, in his broken English, not a native English speaker like some of his younger colleagues, was one of the first to start preaching in English. Other churches soon followed. I knew something was wrong in the first 2 weeks of this past November. Since I live in Germany, my dad and I talked on the phone quite a bit. Usually he would go over to Mom's in her special care facility and call from there so I could talk to both of my parents at the same time. I found it odd that the telephone calls were getting less and less. I phoned my mom, "Where's Dad? He's not picking up." I talked to my sister, "What's up with Dad? He's not picking up." Soon after, my Aunt Rainey informed my sister that my dad had called the ambulance to take him to the hospital. Now this wasn't new. He had been to the hospital many times before and always had gotten straightened out. When I finally got a hold of him on the telephone at the hospital, I asked, "What's up, Dad? What's wrong?" "Son, the time has come. I'm going to die shortly." I tried to give him a pep talk. "Come on, Dad, we've been through this before. You've always gotten better." "No, not this time. I'm going to die here." "Come on, Dad, you've got to try to fight. Let me go to finally meet my Jesus." His big heart was giving out on him. He kept repeating, "If favorite Jimmy Reeves song of his, Till We Meet Again at Jesus' Feet. The last 5 years were incredibly difficult for my dad. The strain of caring for my mom, despite his prayers, seeing her getting weaker and weaker, until she couldn't walk, couldn't get out of bed. This was getting to him, finally. I tried playing God. Dad, you can't die before long. Let me go meet my Jesus. He tried. Oh man, he tried, but his heart was broken and shutting his body down. I have a 6- and an 8-year-old, Joshua and Leyla, who've been praying for Opa Joe for the last 6 to 8 years. How can I break this to them without traumatizing them? Wednesday, November 25th, was Dad's last day of clarity before he slipped into a coma. On this Wednesday, we were able to Skype one final time. The kids sang the Lord's Prayer. They recited the 23rd Psalm. I told my kids, listen, kids, Opa Joe is going to be with Jesus soon. Instead of praying to Jesus for you in Canada, in heaven, he can go directly to Jesus and say, hey, Jesus, I want you to keep a special eye out for Joshua and Leyla. Opa laughed. He enjoyed that. My kids were so excited and happy for Opa Joe. A few days ago, after Dad passed, Joshua, who doesn't quite understand the concept of death yet, said, Dad, when is Opa Joe visiting? I replied, Joshua, you understand that Opa's in heaven now with Jesus, and he's not visiting anymore. But Dad, can't Opa Joe jump on Jesus' back and come visit us from heaven? No, Joshua, he's so happy to finally be with Jesus that he's never leaving Jesus' side again. That seemed to satisfy Joshua. In one of our last conversations, I told my dad I love him very much, but that he had left some pretty impossible shoes to fill for me, for all of us. Being such a perfect father, husband, and human being, he told me just do my best. I'm going to miss you, Dad.
My name is Doris Jakobsh, and I have the privilege of being the daughter of Josef Jakobsh. Thank you, Randy, for those amazing words. I've often wondered what it is that allows some people who've experienced indescribable evil and adversity to remain hopeful and loving and kind, while others grow bitter and in turn spread that bitterness and negativity in others. As you just heard, my father was one of those who in his youngest years experienced the very worst of humanity's ability to inflict carnage and chaos as he became a victim of the internment camps in the post-war era. From the ages of 14 to 19, he was imprisoned and spent most of those formative years of his life beaten, starved, and brutalized. Arriving in Canada soon after his release, a new era began for him, one filled with possibilities and change. But how does one, stunted in the development of education, of skills, of zest for life, begin to establish oneself? How does an individual bruised and beaten to the core of his being find that inner core of strength that allows for hope to glimmer? Philosophers and the learned have written long treatises about similar questions without having found answers that suffice. I do know that my father's journey toward healing began with a very real experience and relationship with the Christ who became the focal point of his entire existence. I also know that the message of forgiveness and salvation and the way of the cross was not only his roadmap throughout his life, but became that which he shared through his life choices, his occupation as a pastor, and that which was constantly occupied his waking hours and his sleeping hours. It was almost impossible to spend more than a few moments with my dad and not be asked, "Do you know Jesus?" Many of you have read his memoir and his last effort to spread that message that was published last year. We have seen his glory. I will not use up the precious time I have to go over the truly remarkable events that shaped my father and that he in turn influenced as well. I want to take a few moments to talk about Josef Jakobsh, the father. By no means a perfect parent. I can say with gratitude that I had a father who listened, who encouraged discussion, who I could turn to truly day and night, who ended every discussion with prayer. Some of my fondest memories as a teenager were late evenings when the two of us, each armed with a Bible and that inevitable Jakobsh stubbornness, debated the meaning and essence of verses and chapters. And sometimes those discussions ended in tears of frustration, for me, other times in the elation of a good routing, but always they ended in prayer. Well, I can also say that my father had early on made the decision that his mission and commitment was first to God and the church. We as a family thrived throughout that ministry because the essence of that ministry was love. And love was also the bedrock of our family, and it still is. Well, I look out today and I see such a marvelous gathering of those whose lives my father touched. I also know that as a result of his often unorthodox message, he was often criticized and even marginalized. Because my father insisted that the greatest of these is love, he often rammed against the walls of dogmatic, legalistic, theological rigidity. And I know that he suffered as a result. But not once did he ever turn his back on those who worked exceedingly hard to make him see first the error of his ways, and more importantly, an interpretation of the truth that allows for shaming, shunning, and overall rejection of others. No, for all were part of the Church of Christ, one that Dad believed in and worked tirelessly to establish unity and wholeness in the name of love. When in that same name of dogmatism, his beloved church split, first in congregations in the West and continued its tenuous ripple onwards, my father took an unprecedented stance against the disunity that followed. While families broke apart as a result of that split, the effects of which are still apparent today, nearly half a century later, our extended family did not break apart, and those relationships flourished. When his beloved church in Aylmer too experienced the breaking away of members who thought Dad's message of love and forgiveness and inclusion was not up to snuff, I thought my father's heart would break. In fact, it did. But he continued to work for wholeness and unity in the church. And everyone throughout his ministry knew they could always turn to Pastor Jay where they were fighting the demons of addiction or greed or power. When those who were broken or rejected by family or society, Dad and Mom's door was always open. With the rather limited tools available to him to address depression or other forms of mental illness, he was steadfast in his belief in the power of love to overcome all, to heal, and ultimately to forgive. I need to say a few words to the congregation here in Vernon who stood behind my father's vision and who over the past 20 years have carried and supported my parents. I do not have enough words to thank you. Your steadfast love and affection and kindness has been beautiful to behold. To the youth, please know, and you do know, my father always held you in his prayers. To his former minister and his dearest friend, Art, Lang, and Edith, our gratitude. To his current minister, Gary Glantz, and Karen Glantz, your open heart has been an inspiration both to my father and to us, his family. To all of you who gave so faithfully to the music my father loved, Jürgen and Doris in particular, and the rest, you know who you are, our gratitude. The audaciousness of love, the radicalness of love, the transformative power of kindness, These sum up the core of my father's beliefs. They informed his choices and his efforts throughout his life, only growing stronger as his life's essence began to fade. The Chinese, I'm a scholar of world religion, the Chinese have a saying that the gentleness of water can wear down the hardness of stone. My friend Lilli Wuenscher, a songwriter in the United Church of Canada, calls it turning the world upside down. Dad believed in changing the world, one smile, one Bible verse, one invitation at a time. Let me turn again to my father as a family man. His unshakable love for his life's partner, Sonja, his queen, always his bride, is now almost legendary. And for good reason. Sonja was the woman who stood by him and helped shape him, yes, create him. She had a way of never allowing my dad to take himself too seriously, but unceasingly supported him, even when it meant uprooting his family over and over again, even when it wasn't in the best interests of his family, who followed him during his missionary trips and propped him up in his darkest hours. Mum was his bedrock, and she was our bedrock. And for those of us who have had the privilege of watching Dad's devotion to our mother since her Parkinson's diagnosis, as her once strong and proud body began to shrink and to wither, understand that he was only paying back what she had given him throughout their long life together. But what love, what devotion. When Dad could no longer care for Sonja and they were separated from one another physically, there was not one shred of emotional and physical distance between them. No, their love grew throughout these years as Dad visited Mum, first 3 times daily, then twice daily, and then once as his own strength and abilities waned. His last full sentence before he died were to his wife and soulmate, and they were, "Love you, love you." How fitting, how splendid. One of the last phone calls he made was to his sister Joanne, not able to come to her brother's funeral. He loved her dearly. His nieces and nephews who are here today, Julie, Carl, Tony, Wally, John, Christine, Ruben, Jennifer. His brother Frank and Ermie's daughter, Karen Watchhorn, Tom Jakobsh, who could not be here. I need to say thank you to Tante Rainey, to Connie and the kids, to Tante Inge, Horst and Daryl, Tante Ilse and family. Know how much he loved you, know how proud he was of you, and how he prayed for you. And to us as his children, his belief in our goodness was unshakable. Even when we made choices that pained him, not once did he turn his back on us. I remember so clearly after an argument between us when I realized I was being unfair and unjust, and I turned to him for forgiveness. He said, "Doris, I love you. I'm your father. I understand you better than you understand yourself." And he was right. And how he loved our life partners, Paul, Beauty, and Lily, for he understood from his own experiences that each of you two are responsible for the shaping of his children and his grandchildren, and his embrace of you was palpable. And his grandchildren, Leyla, Joshua, Kaira, and Jessen, oh, what love and pride and support you had in your Opa. You have been shaped by his love and care and prayers in a way that you will never know. Your Opa and Oma prayed for you before you were born and never ceased until Opa passed on. And I see so clearly his influence in you in so many ways. For you to understand the power of love, of forgiveness, of compassion, of kindness, and it will carry you far. And it is up to you to continue to turn the world upside down. And now to return to the heartbeat of my father. And these 3 things remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Radical, audacious, transformative love. May it be so.
Jakobsh was a very special man. In the past several years, I had the privilege of getting to know him better. I worked for the city, and while he was working on his book, he would call me for technical issues on his computer, and I would get phone calls like, he would say, "Is this the mayor of Vernon?" Or I'd say things like, "You know, Darren, you're so smart, they should make you mayor." Anyway, when I think of the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, Brother Jay was those things. Evidence of a man who is a friend of God. He was an amazing role model for me and a good friend. Always loving, always encouraging, always so full of hope. He was a major source of inspiration for me, and I will miss him. But I'm also happy for him that you know, he will no longer suffer and that he's with his best friend now. He had specifically requested the song, as Randall mentioned, "Till We Meet Again," to be sung at his memorial. And please listen to the words and think of them as though they were from him.
God be with you till we meet again. By his counsels guide uphold you. With his sheep securely fold you. God be with you till we meet again. Till we meet, till we meet, till we meet at Jesus' feet. Till we meet, till we meet. God be with you till we meet again. God be with you till we meet again. 'Neath his wings protect and